So this is from the shorter note on KAMMA, from the second paragraph. The question of KAMMA, or action, what should I do, is the ethical question. For all personal action, all action done by me, is either akusala or kusala, unskillful or skillful. Unskillful action is rooted in lobha, dosa, moha, or lust, hate, delusion, and, apart from resulting in future dukkha and unpleasure, leads to the arising of action, not to the cessation of action. Skillful action is rooted in non-lust, non-hate, and non-delusion, and leads to the cessation of action, not to the arising of action. The Patujana does not understand this, since he sees neither the arising nor cessation of action. The Ditti Sampanna does understand this, since he sees both the arising and cessation of action. The Arhat not only understands this, but has also reached the cessation of action, since for him the question, what should I do, no more arises. To the extent there is still intention in the case of the Arhat, there is still conscious action, but since it is neither unskillful nor skillful, it is no longer the action in the ethical sense. Extinction, nibbana, is the cessation of ethics. So, what interested me with this was the idea of things leading to more action or less action. And that's kind of what the Patujana needs to understand. It's a matter then, I guess, of what is the distinction between those two? Like, what is it then between greed, hatred, delusion, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, that does lead to this cessation of action? Like, what is special, different between them?
Right. Before, like, the one thing to point out is the problem with Patujana and the notion of action is that they cannot see the negative aspect of a positive action. They cannot see the... So let's say action A is done, then you replace that by doing something else, as in you do an action B. Then you replace that by doing something else, by you do action C. What Patujana needs to start discerning is that you don't want to replace action A with action B. You want to be able to develop a non-action of not A, as in absence of action A. And that's the definition of sila and virtue being done rightly. In the beginning, people take on the precepts and they do them. Even if you're not actively doing anything, your attitude is of doing it, keeping it. But if you have been developed in virtue correctly, then those precepts start keeping you, so to speak. In other words, you recognize that it's not about doing sila, it's more about not doing non-sila, not doing non-virtue. And the reason, that's why the sila is a necessary precondition for any understanding, is because it emulates the principle of overcoming the unwholesome. So initially, of course, a Patujana just needs to abstain from unwholesome action, speech and thought. But that's only there to create a basis for understanding, and that understanding is when you see the negative aspect, as in the peripheral, the general nature of the unwholesome, and you stop entertaining the unwholesome. And that general nature becomes apparent when you realize that unwholesome is concerned with the content of your thought, not the presence of that content of the thought. So in that manner, you can cultivate non-unwholesome, which is automatically wholesome.
So you're saying then that the wrong thing to do is kind of trying to make yourself wholesome, so to speak, by doing good ethical things that people agree is good and wholesome and stuff.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's nothing unwholesome to do that, but it's wrong to think that that's the way of leading you out of wholesome and unwholesome. You get out of it by not engaging with unwholesome, and then discerning that absence of unwholesome is what wholesome is. Ultimately, wholesome in the sense that pertains to the freedom from both wholesome and unwholesome. But when you recognize that you don't need to do something, all you need to do is avoid doing certain things, as in avoid the unwholesome, that in itself is wholesome. So it's a negative action in that sense, which means you can't really call it an action. Abstaining from unwholesome action, if done rightly, it's not an action.
So is that how it is then, that when he says the Arhan, Arhans obviously still do things, they don't just become rocks or blocks of wood,
Yeah.
but there's no action there in the sense
Exactly.
that we're speaking.
Because action was on the level of that assumption of doing, either doing good or doing bad. That is fueled by greed, aversion, delusion. That's fueled by desire. That's fueled by craving.
Even for wholesome, like craving.
Even for wholesome, yeah. That's why sometimes people are, because I'm not free from desire, I won't do anything wholesome. But that's a mistake. You have no choice but to do whatever you do out of a desire. But you keep doing good then on account of avoiding bad, because then on account of doing good, you can see the abstaining from doing both bad and now this good is that negative phenomena behind the action that you can discern. So yeah, if say being immoral is A, being moral is B. So you then do B, but it's still done as an action. But then on top of it, if you want to go beyond, and you can go on the beyond of being moral, you can then use that action to understand the nature of action, to transcend the content of action, as I was describing in the previous video. So if you have stopped doing the unwholesome, and now your act is purely virtuous, kept by the precept, seeing the danger in the slightest fault, your action is action B, that is a good action, and then on top of that you start then discerning, okay, so I don't need to go and do action C now, nor do I need to revert to action A. All I can do now is look at the nature behind the action B, which in itself it's not B. And then you can stop doing that as well. That's why like a Sotapanna, he lets go of Sila Bhatta Paramasa. He lets go of the virtue and duty. I must be doing this as somebody who practices. That doesn't mean he becomes immoral. It just means he stops doing it on the level of action and starts developing it on the level of mind. That's why a Seka, somebody, a noble disciple, Sotapanna or higher, all he needs to do is keep his virtue unblemished, and it will result in arhanship. It will result in freedom from remorse. Freedom from remorse results in happiness, joy, and tranquility, and then clear seeing and understanding. But you can't just keep the precept and then expect to end in as a result the understanding of Dhamma. You need to keep the precepts to create that basis of good action, and then on the basis of good wholesome action, you have to see the nature of action, which in itself, it's not that content of action that you're doing. So abstaining from doing something does not need to become an action if you can develop it in that manner.
Obviously, people always have some sense of, what is right and what is wrong, regardless of whether they ever really read anything about ethics or morality or anything like that. And a lot of people, they say that the Buddha and all the other religious leaders taught the same morality, same ethics, like in the 10 Commandments and other such things, like thou shalt not kill, not steal, those, basic precepts. So what is it about the Buddha's exhortation about these things that differentiates them from any other person talking about what is good, what is bad?
Well, in layman's terms, the difference is that the Buddha tells you to do good, so that eventually, through understanding, you can abandon both good and bad. All the other religions pretty much tell you do good so you get even better, as in you get reborn in heaven or you get more of a reward. From Hinduism, Christianity, all the other religions. So that's the difference. The Buddha doesn't just tell you to replace bad action with good action and be rewarded for it. He tells you to replace bad action with good action and then understand it fully, that will then truly free you. Because you might be rewarded for your good action, but that reward will expire. It won't last forever. And then you're back on square one, or even worse. But the Buddha frees you from the bondage of action, the bondage of having to choose, the bondage of having to act and intend.
Some other people, especially the non-religious, can have the view that there is no morality. Like it's like a nihilistic view. Like it's all relative. That ethics and morals just come from, the laws of society and different cultures. But when we read this, it seems pretty clear. Like killing is unwholesome.
Yeah.
Whatever the reasons, the motivation, it's always unwholesome.
Yeah. Existential discrepancy is unwholesome, and it's felt as wrong by anyone, no matter of their background, culture, views, politics, religion. And that's what everything that's considered bad contains that discrepancy. As in, through life you deny life or someone else's life, which is not yours to deny with, or lying, again, taking that which is not yours, which is not meant for you, stealing, cheating, harming, again, all of that causes that discrepancy, and people feel that is the universal morality that can be discerned on the basis of nature of things. Now people can debate about the specifics of it, but overall everybody knows deep down whether their action is motivated in overriding the discrepancy and creating and acting out of greed, aversion, delusion, or hatred, and so on.
Sometimes when it comes to thinking about what's good and bad, people, especially the philosophically minded, like to start, positing all these theoretical problems. Like the most serious one is probably the trolley problem, for example, or kind of playing devil's advocate about killing is okay if it's, let's say, someone has a chronic disease and you're relieving them of pain and suffering. So is there any value in kind of thinking of these kind of complicated ethical questions, or is it just a distraction?
Well, all of them, it's a distraction for somebody who wants to practice Dhamma, but even if you want to think about them for whatever reason, all of the conclusions that those theoretical questions would arrive at are based on assuming the external point of view of yourself and then making the universal sort of decision, which is impossible. It's inconceivable. You can't imagine the experience outside of your experience as a whole, which means you always are bound with your point of view, which means killing is always bad. No amount of external reasoning and the environment can justify it. So if they say, well, if I don't kill this person, he'll kill 100. Well, killing 100, that's on him, that's not on you. So then what you're really saying is, I'll kill him so he doesn't do anything bad in his life. So I'll do something bad so he doesn't do anything bad. Which means somebody will need to take responsibility for that killing. Hence, killing is always bad.
So when it comes to discerning wholesome and unwholesome, then it seems like the most important thing is a personal responsibility.
Absolutely, it's a necessary thing, yeah. And that's what I mean. Through that personal responsibility, you can obviously abstain from doing unwholesome, and then through accepting responsibility for wholesome, you can start seeing the nature of action in regard to it, as in the necessity of the point of view, the necessity of intentionality, but the non-necessity of appropriation of that action. You cannot see that in unwholesome action, because by default it's already perverted based on that discrepancy of appropriation. But wholesome action isn't. That doesn't mean that wholesome action is understood. So that's what I mean. You abstain from doing good through doing good, but then disowning the ownership of that while you're doing it. So then it becomes non-doing. Then you don't really have to do it anymore. Hold on. So just to add more to that whole thing of ownership, through doing wholesome action, one's motivation can be revealed. And if the motivation itself does not contain that discrepancy, that perversion of the existential discrepancy, whether through killing, lying, stealing, acting out of greed, aversion, delusion, then it can be seen the extent of one responsibility to that wholesome action that a person does. As in intentionality in itself arises on its own. By you choosing to act upon certain intentions on account of ignoring other intentions, that's on you. And that's something that gets obscured through the habitual action of unwholesome nature. You cannot see this background of intentionality behind. And if you uproot the unwholesome intentions, that's when you stop acting, in that sense.
There can also be the temptation, the Buddha starts talking about the cessation of action, and a person just tries to just do as little as they can.
Yeah,
basically.
Failing to see that that's their action at the time. It boils down to what in essential philosophy they were saying, you are free to choose, but at the same time you cannot not choose, which means you're condemned to be free. Condemned to be free and condemned to a choice. Because if you say, okay, I'm not going to choose anything, you chose that. And that's a definition of karma that the Buddha describes as action. You cannot help but do something. So the only way to stop truly doing anything and choosing is to understand the nature of that choice. The nature of intentionality inherent in it that has nothing to do with you, and then the degree of your responsibility that you then add to it by choosing this, by intending this on account of that. Choice is an intentional intention. But intention in itself, it's not your doing and does not need to be appropriated. Not knowing that, people appropriate it, and then by default, when then you intentionally intend further your own intentions, it's just, I am doing this. And that does become your action. But if you recognize that intentionality is bound with things, with the five aggregates, with experience as a whole, then you can stop entertaining the unwholesome habits of that intentionality, and then stop entertaining the wholesome ones, the ones that do not contain that discrepancy of existential nature. And that's the definition of kusala as kusala and akusala as akusala.